Okay. So hi, David. Welcome to ALA Midwinter.
My pleasure to be here.
I'm glad that you're here to sign copies of your new book, Spotted Tail. Yeah. So I have a couple questions I want to ask you.
Yes.
Reycraft Books focuses on publishing books by authors and illustrators from underrepresented groups. So I would like to know a little bit more about your connection to your book, Spotted Tail.
Well, I just want to say I'm so proud of Spotted Tail. This book is wonderful, and it really is a dream of my life to bring the story of Spotted Tail, who is a distant relative of mine, by the way, to bring his story to children, both native and non-native. So my connection is there has always been children's books. There have been a number of children's books about Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse and others, but there was never a children's book for the great leader of my nation, which is the Sichangu Lakota Oyate. That's also known as the Rosebud Sioux tribe. So I'm just delighted with the way it turned out, and the art is wonderful, and so I'm truly honored to have this book with Reycraft.
Great. So talk about Spotted Tail's importance to the Sichangu Lakota Nation today. I know there's a university named after him, so can you talk about that a little bit?
Spotted Tail is the great hero of our people, of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. He is a wonderful and colorful person, and he is the great leader and the great chief of our people. And yet he's somewhat underappreciated in history. Everybody knows who Crazy Horse is. Everybody knows who Sitting Bull is, or Geronimo, but they don't know about Spotted Tail. And I wanted, well, I don't know why. I think it's possible because Spotted Tail was one of the first American Indians to say we should strive for peace rather than fight to the very end. And so I think that made him perhaps appear a little less courageous or a little less attractive. But I would argue that Spotted Tail actually was one of the more realistic leaders to come in and say, look, let's try and all get along, and let's try and make peace so that we can live together in harmony. Now, that didn't always happen, but I think he had a vision. So I really believe that we need a children's book about Spotted Tail, and I'm just, so deeply honored that it could come out with Reycraft.
So tell us how Spotted Tail came to be.
Spotted Tail came to be, the idea has been in my head for a long time. I have two sons, David and Sasha. David is now 15 and Sasha is 12. And so as I was raising them, I was always looking for kids' books, obviously with a native theme. They are enrolled members of my nation, our nation, and I could never find anything for the Sichangu. And so over the years, it's been like, gosh, we need something about Spotted Tail. And so when I heard of this wonderful new opportunity, I literally ran to the computer to contact you, Wiley, and said, hey, gosh, I have an idea. So when I say that it was the dream of a lifetime to write this book, I mean that very truly.
So on the book, we have also your Lakota name. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, my Lakota spirit name is Heska Wanbli, which means roughly translated mountain eagle. So a spirit name is something that really only Lakota people and other Indian people should get. I want to make this very clear that it is not something that is trivial to us. It is not something that is given lightly. It's certainly not something that educators should do in school. So educators should not have a spirit name day at school, okay? It is a serious part of our religious tradition. A medicine man goes into the mountains and prays and comes up with the correct spirit name for a Lakota person. And so he did pray. We did a giveaway, which I describe in the book, yes. and then I was named, and my sons have been named as well. So it's a very solemn, but also a very joyous and wonderful thing for us. So my spirit name is Mountain Eagle.
That's so great. So there are a lot of aspects of Native American culture that are sacred to Native Americans that aren't treated as sacred outside of Native American nations, like spirit animals and things like that. Can you talk a little bit more about what is and is not sacred?
So it's obviously a difficult thing because a lot of people will appropriate American Indian culture. And my view is that we should try to educate folks and get them to see that, you know, that some things are appropriate and some things are not. But rather than coming across with a hectoring or angry tone, I think the correct role is to educate. So do I think it's fine to educate people about what a sweat lodge is or what a giveaway is or what a spirit name is? Yes. Do I think it's appropriate, though, to give kids fake spirit names at a school activity? No, I don't think that's appropriate. But I think that there's a way, you know, again, to educate and inform people. So really, I feel that's my role. I am a professor of Native American Studies. I have lots of students that do not know this stuff. And so it's my life's goal to educate.
That's great. So let's dig into the book a little bit.
Sure.
So one of the things I like about Spotted Tail is at the beginning of the book, you really suck in a young reader because you present Spotted Tail as a 12-year-old so that a young reader can really connect to him on a very personal level. So will you just read from chapter 1 those first few paragraphs so that the listeners can get a sense of how you do that?
I'd be delighted to read from Spotted Tail, and the early chapters were such a joy to write. I'll just give a quick overview of that. I write novels as well, and if you can start with some action, you know, I think the readers always appreciate that, to suck them in with something cool first. So thank you for the kind words. So this is from the first few pages of Spotted Tail. The buffalo herd raced across the plains, kicking up clouds of dust and soil. There were hundreds of them, all running at full speed away from the hunters. The sound of their hooves echoed like giants stomping across the land. Young Spotted Tail looked over at his father, who sat atop his favorite horse. This was the first time Spotted Tail had been allowed to join the hunters, and he wanted to make sure he didn't make any mistakes. His father waved to him, telling him to join the group of riders behind the buffalo. The best horseman rode in the middle of the herd, guiding them to the buffalo jump, which was a steep cliff where most of the animals would fall to their death. Then the tribe would gather at the bottom of the canyon to collect all of the dead bison to use for food, clothing, and tools. The buffalo ran harder and harder, trying to escape from the hunters, but they didn't see the cliff right ahead. Spotted Tail watched the hunters pull back their horses and the bison race off the cliff. It was almost as if they could fly. Spotted Tail's people would now have the food they needed for the long winter. Spotted Tail hoped that he would be allowed to join in the next buffalo hunt, proudly riding next to his father and friends. This was the world that Spotted Tail knew.
Thank you. That was so good. So not only is the text really engaging and will suck in a young reader, but a lot of people have been talking about the visuals, and there's some special aspects to those. So would you talk a little bit about those?
Well, I certainly had nothing to do with this, and I need to honor both artists as well as Reycraft and you as well, Wiley. There was a vision for the art in Spotted Tail that I think is just tremendous, and I know it came from you and the illustrators. So I just want to deeply honor Jim Yellowhawk and Pat Kinsella. So they used a variety of techniques, including ledger art. Ledger art is a technique used by many American Indian artists to draw pictures on ledgers from the 1800s. And so in a sense, what it does is it unites the past and the present in this truly wonderful visual medium. And this is one of the few, if not the only, kids book that I'm aware of, native kids book, that uses ledger art in such a wonderful way. So I hope that my words in the text can do justice to the truly astoundingly wonderful art in this book.
So share some of your favorite illustrations from the book. Just flip through and
there are just so many of
I love the ledger art.
I love the photos of the buffalo flying over, but probably my favorite is the one, I almost cried when I saw it, is the one where Spotted Tail's daughter has passed away.
Yes,
and so in this picture of Spotted Tail mourning and standing by the grave of his daughter, it is just heartbreaking. You feel his pain, and the artwork is so wonderful because there's not only some art, but superimposed, here is a dead, unfortunately, a young lady who has passed away. And so it is just a wonderful piece of art. It's just moving. But really, it's hard to pick a favorite, and I mean that. There are just so many.
Show that spread, because I want you to talk a little bit with the Indian school. The next one. Yeah, and the next one.
So these photos are great. So these are some illustrations from the illustrating the Carlisle Indian School. The Carlisle Indian School was the first and most notorious of the American Indian boarding schools, and there are some photos here that were taken. These are actual photos from the American Indian boarding schools. And why this has such resonance for me is Spotted Tail sent his own children to the Carlisle Indian School and then visited there and saw how the children were being abused and took his children back angrily. My own grandmother was in the last decade of students of the Carlisle Indian School. So I was able to retrieve her records from the Library of Congress. And I knew she'd been there, but I have a treasure trove of documents that I was able to learn about my grandmother's time at the Carlisle Indian School. So again, things have come around full circle. Spotted Tail sent his kids in the very first group that went to the Carlisle Indian School, where they were not educated well and were often abused and beaten, not allowed to speak their language. And then my own grandmother was in the very last wave of students that went to Carlisle. And she sadly has passed on over the spirit world, so I could never ask her what happened, but I was able to trace her journey there.
So you bring up some really interesting issues in your book, like the fact that children were taken from Native American families and they had no say in that. And what was so shocking to me was when a law was passed to protect Native American children. Can you share that?
Yes, it's one of the great shames of the USA, I'm sorry to say. So what we know is that as many as 30 or 40% of children were taken without consent of their parents.
Right.
They were stolen from their parents and then shipped to these off-reservation boarding schools where the goal was to strip them of their culture and force them to assimilate against their will. In fact, the man who devised this, Colonel Pratt, had a saying called, "We need to kill the Indian to save the man," meaning we need to strip them of their language, their culture, their spirituality. And he was horrifyingly successful with this. Now, he was so successful with the reservation school, the boarding schools off the reservation, that a second wave of schools on reservation, day schools, started. So what we know is as many as 80% of all American Indian children were educated either in an off-reservation boarding school or an on-reservation day school, where they used the same methods, 80%. But the most horrifying is the kids that were taken and shipped across the country 1,000 miles, where they often would die, and the parents would never know. It was not until the 20th century that a law was finally passed forbidding this terrible practice. And this 1978, and this terrible practice occurred both in the United States and Canada, and it's one of the great shames, I think, of the United States. And I think we need to educate our people. My students at the college that I teach at have never heard about this, and they're stunned that a 5-year-old kid could be ripped from the grasp of his mother and father and just be taken away. It shocks us. It's horrifying, and it should.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I find so powerful about your book, Spotted Tail. This is a man who lived in the 1800s, but there's a lot of relevancy to what's happening today. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh boy, there's so much in the book that has relevance today, not just the boarding schools and how that affected, but there's another law that was passed because of the death of Spotted Tail called the Major Crimes Act. And this is actually the subject of my novel, which is not for kids and not from Reycraft. My novel, Winter Counts, is out in 2020 from HarperCollins Echo, and it deals with the Major Crimes Act, which is directly related to Spotted Tail. Spotted Tail was murdered by a gentleman called Crow Dog. Crow Dog was prosecuted for murder, but first the tribe said they used their own brand of justice, and they said, we're going to banish you and you must live away from the people for the rest of your days. But the US government didn't like this. It wasn't punitive enough. So they took Crow Dog and they tried him in the American court system and said, we are going to sentence you to death. A lawsuit was filed then on behalf of Crow Dog, the murderer, and the US Supreme Court said, we have no jurisdiction on the Rosebud Reservation. That's one of the few instances that the U.S. Supreme Court ever ruled in favor of Indians. The U.S. Congress didn't like this. The next year, they passed the Major Crimes Act. The Major Crimes Act is still in force today. American Indians are now forbidden from prosecuting most felony crimes that occur on the reservation. This means that even if a tribal policeman catches a bad criminal, they cannot be prosecuted. We must hand them over to the federal prosecutors. But the federal prosecutors decline 50 to 75% of all cases. So rapists, murderers, bad people are let free to reoffend. That is a fact, and this all stems from the death of Spotted Tail.
It was one of the things that was most surprising to me is that the murderer of Spotted Tail was set free because of the Supreme Court ruling.
He was set free, and indeed, the Crow Dog family still exists on the reservation. I have been to the Sundance, which is one of our great religious ceremonies, which is run by Crow Dogs for many years. The Spotted Tails and the Crow Dogs. It was a little tense, but we've made our peace.
It's like the Hatfield to the McCoys. Oh my gosh.
It sort of is. But yeah, I mean, why I think this book is so necessary is there are so many events that Spotted Tail was involved in that have reverberated right up until the present day.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm so deeply proud of this book.
Great. So tell us what's next. You hinted at your adult novel, so share with everyone.
Sure. So again, not for children, anybody watching this, but my novel Winter Counts is, to my knowledge, one of the first crime thrillers written by an American Indian and set on a native reservation. There are a handful of us doing it, but not many. And so it's fairly groundbreaking in that way, or so I've been told. And it's coming out from Echo HarperCollins, August 2020, August 25th, 2020. And I'm very proud of that book. And the second book, the sequel, will be coming out as well. I have a textbook coming out for Introduction to Native American Studies as well. I'm in the process of running that. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that I have a number of ideas that I would love to publish with Reycraft again. Perhaps a book on the boarding schools.
Right.
So we'll see what is to come.
We are very eager to steal your time to do that. So thank you, David, for joining us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you to Reycraft, and thank you to all of the readers of this book. Thank you. Wopila.
That was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Really
If
good.
we have time. So, it's a story about...
Spotted Tail is a story about the great leader of the Sichangu Lakota people. Can I do another take? Sorry.
Yeah.
Here we go.
No,
All right. Okay. Spotted Tail is a story about the great leader of the Sichangu Lakota people, Chief Spotted Tail.
The illustrations are like...
The illustrations of this book are a combination of ledger art, photography, traditional art, and they are wonderful.
This is a very blank story.
This is a... Let me try to take again, because I'm like, what kind of a story is this? Yeah.
You can pass, too.
Okay, no. Let me, all right, let me try. This is an educational but hopefully entertaining story about the life of one of the lesser-known leaders of the Lakota people.
Could he also answer about its relevancy? This is a relevant story? Or...
Yeah.
Spotted Tail is important because there are many events in his lifetime which have reverberated and resonated right up until the present day.
This story speaks to blank.
This story speaks to native and non-native children alike. I hope that everyone can gain from it.
When I first picked up the finished book, I thought...
Oh, when I first picked up the finished book of Spotted Tail, I was blown away by the art, the concept, everything. It's wonderful.
And the last one is... When I started this book, I felt...
When I started this book, I felt overwhelmed but excited, but I'm so thrilled with the way it's turned out.
Excellent. Let's go eat.
All right.
I want to get you some lunch
Oh.
before your signing. We have